Thanks, everybody, and welcome. The focus this afternoon is standard work for leaders, and we're going to try to focus on how do we use that for better time management. So I'm going to start off with just the agenda we're going to look at. So we'll talk a little bit about the thinking behind standard work for leaders. We'll talk about before you step into it as a leader, what are the things you need to know? We'll talk about the modified approach to get here. And finally, we'll talk about some of the results and how this all ties together for time management. Sound reasonable? Okay.
Yep.
Uh, yeah, by the way, questions, just you can either raise your hand or just simply come off mic. Or if you want, you can fire a chat across the line as well. So I'm going to put up just a statement here, and I want you to take a moment to read this. So this is from a perceptionist standpoint. Anybody ever encounter that?
Yes.
Yep. Yes.
Why do people make that statement? Any thoughts?
Well, I think it kind of like the perception is that maybe it kind of backs them into something, like locks them into a requirement, and it being a, maybe from a leader's perspective, maybe they don't want to be tied down to something.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big chunk of it. And a couple of things to think about on this site. So I'll talk about conventional leaders or conventional managers. Uh, Somewhat focus on, I'll call it creativity to get the results done. So creativity taking the form of firefighting, expediting. One of the main issues that potentially the way people do their work and their processes aren't stable. So if you approach this without some level of stability and predictability, it's really hard to develop a routine. And as well, trying to make that connection between, having a system, having standard work and results, we may not do the best job at that as well. And given as well, if you take a look in an organization, you can expect about 20% of your leaders or managers won't want to have anything to do with this regardless of where they go, just because of kind of what Darren was talking about, just that they're locked into a way of doing things. But what the real thinking we should be looking at. So think about standard work for leaders. It is slightly different than standard work we use for executing our work, but think about it. This is the way of doing the job. I'm sorry, this way of doing the job is the best way we know now. So it's the best way we know how to do it today. So we capture that. But really what we're trying to do is focus on the test. So every time we execute a routine, we should be looking at how can we do it better. So we start by stabilizing. We start by saying this is the best way we know how to do it today, and we move through. And the big point, what we're trying to get at, uh, having people with a commitment to improve versus just simply compliance to a tool. So if you have commitment, people will use the tool to help better themselves, better processes, better the way we do their work. If not, it'll just be a checklist, may not represent work. They may just do it to keep the powers to be happy. So some things to think about there. So I'll pause there for a second. Any questions or comments or thoughts on the actual thinking itself?
Yeah, I would agree with that one, Scott. In terms of the one that I've heard a lot of is, people, they just check like the boxes and it's just so they can check the boxes, but there's really no underlying reason. It's just sort of so people can see like that they're doing, they're checking the boxes, but it's not actually applying like the thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. It just becomes that compliance piece in there. Perfect. Yeah. So what we really want to use this is how do we use it to make our lives better and those around us better? So as we approach, some things to think about, and from a leader's perspective, what do we need to know and what we need to do? So the very first piece at the top, and I'm going to go through these in detail. how do we understand the piece of the business that you're responsible, understand your piece of the business, and how do I understand my responsibility for running it? So everybody has their own piece of the business. Everybody should be responsible for running that piece of the business. So there's that first understanding. I'm going to provide you with a list of questions on what that would look like. Step number two is a big one, and I think step number two gets missed a lot. How do we stabilize the work to eliminate as much variation out of it? So when I talk about stabilizing the work, stabilizing my routine as a leader, but also stabilizing the processes that we use to execute our work. If we don't have stability, what we're going to be doing is back to that firefighting and expediting piece. So you can have some level of standard work for leaders, but what we try to do is really stabilize. So when we'll talk about that, how do you identify what you really need to do? How do you get rid of some of the stuff and some of the waste in your process? Once we stabilize, number three is building habits. So how do we make sure it's routines and rhythm? And we'll talk about how to do that on a regular basis. So making sure every day we got a routine, we've got a rhythm that we follow through, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, focusing on the right things. And when we talk about focus, typically that first statement I made, most people or leaders are focused to go after results, perceived results, maybe not real results. So and if you think about a lot of organizations, they're just focusing on getting stuff out the door, whereas we need to focus on results, the processes to get there, but also the people that help us get there. So broadening it and using standard work for leaders to allow us to focus on all three pieces. And the last thing we need to do is observe the work and improve. So taking a look at this from a continuous improvement standpoint, we know the best way, we know how to do our job today. How do we build in this piece that we're always looking at? How do we make it better? So things that we need to do and work on. So step number one, question. So from your standpoint, I'll give people a few minutes to read through these questions and we'll have a discussion around them. So critical pieces that we need to understand. So think about purpose or mission, your piece of the business. Why is it there? What's your mission? What are you there to do? So really understanding that piece of it, so you get clarity. Second piece, customers. Who are your internal and external customers? Who are those that you serve? But when you take a look at the business, take a look at it from a horizontal flow versus a vertical top-down flow. So we think about horizontal. Think about your work as it flows through the business. It starts at a concept design somewhere off to the side, and then it flows horizontally through. So when we identify customers, we have an end customer, but we also have those that we flow our value through. So think about your piece of the business that you're accountable for. What is that? And really, what's the value you provide? So if your downstream operation, you're providing, whether it's information parts or whatever, ask the question, out of all that stuff, what do they actually need? Not necessarily what they want, what do they need? And how do we make sure we're executing on that? And with that, number four, what are the processes that allow you to do that? So with a process mind and taking a look at it, how does that thing flow? And how do your processes work? How do they actually function? Do we have stability in those? Do we have actual standard work behind that to make sure? And depending on your value stream, that could look different. Number five is thinking about results. Good day, bad day. How do we know we're delivering? Are we delivering now perfect, waste-free, and good service? Are those real results or those what we think is in there? And then finally, what's your plan? How do you improve? So really taking a look at these 6 questions. A piece of homework for this group is walking through those. Do you understand those questions? What are the answers, and what are some of the things that we look at? So I'll pause there for a moment and see if there's any questions at all. Okay, so once we understand the business, the next piece is how do we stabilize what we do? So we want to stabilize our own way we approach from a leadership management standpoint. We also want to stabilize the actual work. So from a leader standpoint, we start at the top. Identify what you do every day. So what are those things that you do on a daily basis? Understand how long do they take, but also understand the waste within the process. So off to the right is Tim Woods, taking a look at waste. So what wastes are you encountering? And it could be kind of that firefighting, expediting stuff. That's noise, and typically noise from a process that's not working well. Could also be noise from a people standpoint. Maybe they don't understand the work well. It could be things like unresolved problems or conflict that you have. So, number one, what's the waste that you're encountering? Number two, be aware from your tasks, what waste might you be causing? So sometimes ineffective leadership and management can cause waste. Asking for unnecessary information, making certain demands of your people that aren't necessary, all those things encounter. So number one, identify what you do. Number two, really important, try to identify what you should not be doing, which is a big thing. Just because it's the way we do our work today doesn't mean it's necessary, but base it off those 6 questions that I put before. What should you not be doing? Are there things that you can eliminate? One way to do a quick test, if you stop doing that activity and nobody says anything, in all likelihood, it may not be necessary. Third point down, a couple maybe new phrases are new for people. Work on the business versus work for the business. So thinking about working on the business, these are activities that are actually improving your piece of the business. Working for the business is just stuff that you have to execute on a certain level. Unfortunately, in a lot of companies, I'll call it the player coach player mentality exists where I'm expected to lead people, but I'm also expected to execute core work as well, which sometimes forces us to work at a level that we shouldn't be at. But thinking about what are those things we need to work on the business. So that could be things like process improvement. It could be things like active problem solving. It could be things like developing people. Whereas working for the business is just routine stuff. It may or not be necessary. Could be administrative tasks, other things that you do. It could be chasing, expediting, all those sort of things. So identify those and actually put a percentage against each. Our goal is to increase the percentage of working on the business versus working for the business. The more you're working on the business, the more you're improving it, and the more you're going to get rid of things like waste and instability. Number four, identify your processes. Start to use some of those tools that were provided. Even things, excellent tools like value stream mapping to understand where are the wastes in your process, what things are causing an instability. Excuse me, using active problem solving to make sure you're eliminating things. Simple tools, let's say simple but hard to execute, things like 5S or workplace organization, making sure that you understand the works that's done and how can you eliminate it. The thinking is, from a time utilization standpoint, the better processes are working, the less time you have to spend fighting with them. The better processes are working, the less time you have to fight with them. And then finally, the last piece, what's your plan? What's your plan to eliminate unnecessary tasks, uh, eliminate waste, and improve your process? So trying to understand what things you need to do. So again, it's not as easy as just coming up with a list of management or leader routines to run. It's trying to identify the right stuff, and it's identifying a lot of the noise that we have. So I'll stop there for a moment and see if there's any questions. Okay. Once we do that, this is where the hard work comes into play. Oh, sorry, Darren, did you have a comment?
Oh,
Okay, so this is where the hard work comes into. How do we actually create habits from there? So step one, and I'll show you, and again, I'm not fussed up on the format or the tool. You need to have a way. There's a couple things that you need to do within the tool itself. But number one, what should you be doing? And focusing not just on perceived results, actual results. How do we keep our eye on processes, and how do we make sure we're looking after our people? We'll get into things for consideration, but from a time standpoint, the closer you are to where their actual work functions, the larger the percentage of your time will be in regular routines. The further away from you are from the work, there's more variability in the routine. Less of your time will be spent on standardized work for leaders. So, first is identify those things, and the other thing is look at it from a capacity standpoint. Sometimes we forget uh, how long we have during the course of a day. So identify how long the task should take, and we're not looking at you going around with a stopwatch, just identifying how long it should take. This is for you. If we were doing process work on a shop floor, we would then get down to that element of timing. In this case, it's just understanding how long it should take, adding that number up to see what percentage of your capacity that these steps will take. Second piece is identify when they should be done. Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? Understanding kind of what the rhythm is from there. The next piece you're going to do, then identify. This is your standard work. This is what I need to do daily. This is what I need to do weekly, monthly, quarterly. So starting with that, remember focusing on results, process, and people. And finally, I'll show you from there, develop your habit plan and how you're actually going to sustain and execute this. So, a few things. This is a format I use. You could use other formats that are out there. Couple key things that I do a little bit differently. When we talk about the OST element, I'll show you what that is. For our organizational thinking model, simply are we focusing on process or on results? Are we focusing on process? Are we focusing on people? So is it a management system issue? Is it a core or a production issue? Is it a human issue? From there, identifying the work on the business, work for the business, so you know, is this just an execution thing, or is it something for approval? What is the work you need to do, and a very slight description of what it is. From there, you just simply check the box on did you do it, yes or no. Here's the critical piece that I think we tend to miss from a lot of standpoints. So in this case, you need to record the misses. And what I mean by that, if you didn't get it done, let's understand why. That comes with observations. Is it a block? Is it not necessary? And then what are your actions to correct it? And this is the secret of this tool is how we learn and how do we get better and how do we actually use it as a tool for improvement. And to me, this piece here, this is the value that we're going to take from this. Talk about time management. It identifies those things that we need to do versus not, and how do we get better at utilizing our time. So again, importance piece is that last bit. Okay. Questions so far? All right. So a couple other things is creating habits. So it takes from practice, experience, experiments we've run, it takes 28 days of executing something in a row to become a habit. So in this case, what you need to use is your standardized work for leaders. You would have to execute it 28 times in a row using that, and it's actually following the routine of the rhythm in order to create a habit. And so thinking about getting into that routine place, think about what your cue is. And a cue could be a time, a place, it could be the first of the day. It could be maybe my first, performance board meeting of the day. It could be a shift change, whatever. So think about what's the cue. When do I start? And typically, from a leader standpoint, it's when you start your work. What's the routine? And so that's your leader standardized work. What do I need to do daily, weekly, monthly? And from there, think about what's the reward. In this case, the reward should be a better way to manage your piece of the business, an easier way to get results, making sure that you've got really good processes. It doesn't take your time firefighting and expediting, and making sure you've got people that are executing on the right things. And think about all those things that frustrate you, take your time. That's your reward from getting here. So what I recommend is how we do it is print off a calendar with 28 slots in it. Um, if you can, get a peer to help you with this. So a peer will check on you daily, and they will ask, you know what, did you use your LSW or use your standardized work? If the answer is yes, you get a green check. If the answer is no, you get a red X. Anytime you get a red X, you got to start over at day one. You're not finished until you check 28 repetitions or 28 boxes in a row. Typically, this takes about 3 to 4 months to execute. So that means the use of the tool, that means the rhythm and the routine is typically in place from here. You still need to do your observations and adjustments on a regular basis, observations about processes, adjustments on your standardized work to move through. So critical piece in here to sustain. We'll also talk about in a minute, leader standardized work. If you're building it fully in your organization, it starts at tier one and tier one or tier two. When I talk about tier one or tier two, think about team leaders and supervisors. We build that first, and then we build the other pieces. So tier three, middle manager, tier four, senior manager on top of that. The reason why we build it is to build a layered audit process and to build a support mechanism. We'll talk about that. So that means tier three is looking at supporting and helping tier two, tier four to tier three, all the way through. So think about from a build standpoint. Okay. A few other things. We talk about the OST model. We're going to run a session in about a few weeks on OST and how it works, organizational system thinking. But a high level, you've got 3 systems in your organization. We have a core or production. And think about, regardless if you're information factory or product factory, this is how you get your work done. So that's the process side, creating stability. Think about your human side, that's your people. Capabilities, also some of that culture stuff we look at. Predominantly in your case for stability, it's talking about capabilities, whether it's human or technical or future skills. And results, that's your management system, your central nervous system. So this is, how do we see the results from our processes? Is it achieving the best possible quality when our customer needs it at a reasonable cost with excellent service? So that's what we talk about, delivering perfect, delivering now, delivering waste-free, and also delivering excellent service. So from there, it's identifying how we're performing and how we actively problem solving or working on the business to improve. So thinking about those 3 animals. Last piece to take a look at is observing and improving. So like anything else, I follow the plan, do, check model. So in here, we've talked about the steps of how to create your standardized work for leaders. You implement it and you execute it and continually using that observation piece. What's working, what's not working, how do we do that? Once we figure that out, we adjust, we update, and we continue to move. So your leader standardized work or your standard work for leaders will evolve as we move through. Okay. Couple other pieces, and I'll open it up for questions from here. So real things to consider. I will say a lot of organizations have tried to implement standardized work for leaders. And if you notice, I'm calling it standardized work for leaders versus leader standardized work. Because really everybody should have some form of standardized work in your organization, whether it's work-based to execute or whether it's for a leader piece. So big things we need to do is how do you make that connection between standard work for leaders and the focus on results, people, process, and people. So answering that question, how's this making my life easier? How's it reducing my frustration? How's it helping me get more things done? So making that strong connection. Whatever your standardized work is, it must be the actual stuff you do. It can't be something that you think you need to do. It has to be your actual routine, and through the habits you need to adopt it. Um, what we need to do as organizations is make sure that there is clarity. What are the results are expected and what behaviors are expected in our organization to be clear? What are the standards? How do they work? Thinking about standardized work from a leader's perspective. So wherever you are, if you think about the higher you get in an organization, the less specific your standardized work will become. Because at the senior levels, there's more variation in work. If I'm at a team leader level, that means team leader is I'm actually doing work, plus I'm doing some things to support processes. Your standardized work for leaders will represent about 80% of what you do. From a supervisor standpoint, there's a little more variability. Typically, they represent 50% of what you do, and at the middle and senior managers, 20%. These are the important things that you need to do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. The other thing that we hope we'll do at some point, we'll talk about continuity. So, best practices, set up a forum, set up a way that leaders can get together to figure out the best way to run. At some point in an ideal situation, what you would want, a leader at a certain tier level should be able to move to a different area and at least have some form of leadership rhythm that we have. And the one I talked about before, when you're building it, bottom up. So what needs to be done to support the front line? From there, what do I need to do to support the supervisors? From there, as a senior leader, what do I need to do to support middle managers, but also as well, building in redundancy. Tier 4 should have a layered audit approach to check on tier 3 to provide them help and coaching and learning. And same thing, tier 3 to tier 2 and tier 2 to a team leader's work. So a few things to think about as we build. Any questions or comments so far?
Just my one question slot. So I guess this is sort of more of, as you said, you're revitalizing sort of the LSW approach. Is this sort of what you, or is this a little different than that?
Yeah, so it is a slightly different way to take a look at it. So typically what happens, people will say you need leader standardized work, go figure out what you do and run it. Uh, to me, it doesn't work because we haven't done the right work to make sure we set up our people for success. So it is a different way to look at it.
Yeah, I think it's a better way for sure, though.
Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. So there's some elements, but it's the approach is different. And also as well, it's the lens that you look at standardized work as well, versus, it's just that checklist thing that you kind of do. Okay. I don't know, does that help or make sense of it?
That makes sense. Yeah, for sure. That's definitely a lot of things that we're sort of experiencing. It's making a lot of sense too, as one of the things that we want to improve on for this year.
I think, Scott, some of
Thanks,
the
Joel.
benefit, some of the discussions we've had over the course of the year on this topic is about starting small and not trying to take on too much and it becomes overwhelming, I think is pretty key. I think it's proven to have, be a little bit more successful for the handful of folks that have rolled it out here at Centerline.
Yeah, so don't do everything, pick a pilot area, focus on it, and
Mhm.
do it that way and learn how it best works for you. I absolutely agree with that. Okay. So last piece I have, how does this tie into time management? So we talk about from a time management standpoint. So it's really about stabilizing the way you approach your world and your work. So where we lose our time, again, firefighting, expediting, that creativity thing, to starting to create some stability, understanding what you should be doing, understanding what you should not be doing, and moving to a commitment for improvement versus just compliance. So what it's going to do, if it's done well, it's going to move from just trying to get things done to actually focusing on what are the vital few of the important things we've done. If you focus on your results, you focus on making sure you have really good processes, you focus on your people, a lot of that noise will disappear. And when the noise disappear, you will create more time and capacity. But it starts with how do we focus on those important things that we need to do. From there, again, thinking about, I'm running my piece of the business. How do we create more time for that? Okay. So what I intended to go through again is taking a look at kind of what standardized work for leaders is or isn't, thinking about the thinking, the approach, some things to consider for sustaining and how do we approach it. Now, with this, even if you don't have a formal standardized work program in your organization, you can still use this tool to help yourself, focusing on your own area, you using this kind of thinking to stabilize and to help create more time for yourself as well. Okay, so I'll stop there. That's the content that I had hoped for to deliver today. And I will now open it up if there's any questions or comments or feedback from anybody.